Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Psychedelics Today, Solidarity Fridays. Today on the show, Kyle and I are going to get into some fun news. How you doing today, Kyle?
Good. How are you doing?
Doing pretty good. So,
I feel like it's been a while with news updates.
Yeah, got sidetracked.
Happens.
And yeah, totally, especially in this space. So we wanted to, before we dig in, just mention that we have, in about a little less than a month, kick off our next 2 cohorts of navigating psychedelics for clinicians and therapists, 8-week program where we work you through a ton of material and pretty much get you quite fluent in the space. Like psychedelically literate is just the beginning. You're going to be more than that. You're going to be able to understand like the weird business landscape, different theoretical frameworks, harm reduction, and much more. Like a lot of this stuff will, easily be able to pull into your clinical practice right now. Like maybe you can't throw ayahuasca at them, but maybe you can use ketamine. And, if you're doing a drug counseling service, like this is pretty helpful to get actual real information so you know how to talk to your clients and patients about that stuff. And anything else you want to throw in there, Kyle?
No, the starts January 7th, 2 p.m. Eastern, 7 p.m. Eastern, and you can learn more at psychedeliceducationcenter.com. Sign up.
All right. So let's dig in here. First off, CYBIN, Adelia. What do you want to say about that?
Yeah, I just want to give a shout out to one of our colleagues and friends, Brett Greene. Looks like CYBIN signs a definitive agreement with to acquire Adelia Therapeutics. So Brett was part of Adelia. So yeah, big shout out to him for making this happen. Yeah.
Yeah, it looked like a pretty big deal. So CYBIN is becoming a pretty big company. And yeah, the recent acquisition of Adelia is pretty interesting. I don't really have too much to say about the deal. I wish I knew more about what they were manufacturing there, but they're a very interesting company. Like Brett's a really smart guy, and I'm glad that he was able to make that work. So congrats, Brett. Congrats, CYBIN. Just really excited to see where you go from here.
Yeah. And I guess
next up, go ahead.
I guess I'll read a little bit here. Adelia is an innovative biopharmaceutical company committed to addressing unmet mental health needs through the development of proprietary psychedelic therapeutics with improved dosing, efficacy, and therapeutic indices. Adelia's leadership team brings a wealth of clinical development experience in major academic research affiliations from Massachusetts Institute of Technology, Harvard, Stanford, Yale, and Northeastern University. So, yeah, again, we're friends with Brett. He was actually the first person to really kick off Psychedelics Today. So, just yeah.
Yeah, and you guys kicked off your relationship at a really cool event in Amherst in Massachusetts. Is that right?
No, I met Brett originally at Horizons. I forget when that was. Probably 2012, something like that. Whenever they kicked off Psymposia, it was right before they had their own event. So,
yeah, it's awesome. Cool. So next up, Silo Pharma. I think this is pretty cool. They just got approval, I think, for phase 2 for a low-dose psilocybin treatment for Parkinson's disease. Is that right?
Yeah. Phase 2B clinical investigation, low-dose psychedelics on cognitive and emotional dysfunctions in patients with Parkinson's disease. So yeah, that's really awesome to hear. I feel like we haven't heard too much. I think there's been some research on maybe ayahuasca and Parkinson's.
I think it was ibogaine. Yeah, like so how this feels to me is it's really cool. It's kind of challenging our definition of psychedelics in some ways. So like when we're in conversation with Lenny, and because of where he's come from in his history, right? It's like this is all kind of mental and psychic when there are actual physical situations going on in the body, like Parkinson's, you're getting like plaques building up and other issues like Alzheimer's and whatnot. Like there are like structural / organic disorders that can be treated that aren't like, depression or anxiety, right? Like there's actual physical problems that can probably get healed. Like if we're looking at neurogenesis and like possibly healing TBI, like it's kind of a similar talk track for me.
Yeah.
So I guess it just challenges that Graphian definition of like non-specific amplifier. Though I still think that's really helpful. It's just maybe not encompassing enough since there's going to be physical stuff coming.
Yeah. Yeah, here on Parkinson's News Today, the trial will assess safety and efficacy of repeated low doses of psilocybin and LSD. And really cool to hear LSD involved here. And their effects on well-being, emotional and cognitive attention, and biological markers of neuroplasticity, which is the ability of neural networks, the large-scale intertwined circuits that connect nerve cells to one another, in the brain to grow and reorganize. Secondly, the goal will include effects of low doses of psychedelics on cognition performance, measures of memory and executive functioning, which are commonly impaired in Parkinson's, as well as emotional regulation and biological markers of well-being.
I've said this on the show before, but Parkinson's, you get that really strong shake.
Yeah.
It's like pretty embarrassing for a lot of people and like in a lot of ways. Allie, my girlfriend used to actually like sell these THC patches.
Oh, wow.
THC CBD combo transdermal patches way back to people with Parkinson's. And the guys would like cry because they finally were able to hold their grandkids like safely. Like, and they just used a quarter of this patch. So like, if we can treat this is a big deal. Like I know people with Parkinson's. I think I have some in my family. Perhaps that means I'm in line to get it later. Who knows? But like, yeah, we need these developments, and it's really just exciting to see this happening. So thank you, Silo Pharma. It's awesome.
Yeah, and just cool to see like other disorders outside of like, depression and PTSD to kind of, just see what else these could be really effective with.
Right. I think the more indications we can treat, or it shows like hopeful data that we can treat these things, the less likely the feds are and the international governance groups to like come in and try to squash this renaissance. Like how many people are freaked out about Alzheimer's and Parkinson's? Like I think most people are, more scary than a heart attack is dementia for most people, or even cancer. Like cancer, at least you're going out with your wits. Like dementia, it's like, good Lord, man. Like what is that?
And the impact it has on the families too.
No joke.
Yeah.
Yeah. So just thankful. And TheraPsil, this is really cool. They had a big round of approvals on being able to, therapists themselves being able to train to be better therapists by using psilocybin. TheraPsil is this group in Canada fighting for end-of-life access to psilocybin for, end-of-life anxiety, whatever that is. And really awesome. We've got to talk to like one or two of those team members up there. I think I talked to the guy that kicked it off a while back. And we got to meet Angela out of Vancouver, which is really cool. And she was, I think, in one of the first groups doing the work, which is really awesome. So yeah, the fact that they're going to have a legal exemption now, like that's amazing. Like beyond MAPS, like I don't know that other groups are getting that kind of exemption from the government.
Right. Yeah, it seems like Canada, it feels a little bit more progressive at times with some of this stuff.
At times, yeah. No, totally. Like it's amazing because they don't have the same kind of baggage we've got. And this is like it's a really important thing to consider, that we're playing the whole globe here for progress in these medicines and drugs. So like if we're just playing in the US, it's like a really different thing where we're fighting against like the lobbies. Like the drug lobbies here are insane relative to in other countries. And, thankfully other, leading first world developed countries, they're able to play in the same science arena we are here in the States. So like the States is not the only show in town. It's kind of hard for us as Americans to see that sometimes, but there's a whole globe. We might be the third largest country by population, the highest GDP, but there's plenty of other players and plenty of other wealthy countries that can contribute here in skilled ways.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think this is just important for, approving the use for professional training. Like I know MAPS allows that, but doesn't sound like from some of the updates with Compass, like they're going to allow substance or drug sessions. Yeah. And so to kind of get this approval for professional training to maybe understand what the experience is like, I don't know, I think that's a big deal.
Right. Like there's a lot of nervousness around training, I think. Like
Yeah.
what constitutes good training? And like not only is it a ton of education, but it's kind of a ton of time. Like, the same way psychoanalysts have to go through psychoanalysis themselves and therapists have to do therapy themselves. Why is it not the case that psychedelic people need to do the same? I remember talking to Mike Margulies at Horizons last year. This is like his hot issue
Mm.
in 2019 Horizons. And I'm like, cool. Like, let's work on that. How can you make a compelling argument that convinces regulators? Like, because they're not insiders like us that kind of
Right.
understand the why. So yeah, what are those arguments? And I didn't see them necessarily making it. Like the ones against, like I I'm a little stuck on making it mandatory
Mm.
because what about people who can't safely do it?
Right. Yeah.
Because there's people who will get sick, that will get, hurt, maybe have to get hospitalized. Maybe it's not psilocybin, maybe it's a bunch of ketamine and holotropic breath work. Maybe it's different drugs or different methods, Like I know that I feel really qualified and most of my time in was holotropic breath work.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how other people feel about that, but
Yeah, and I guess it's kind of like, what does a person embody some of those like core competencies and skill sets, and what are those, and how could you maybe strengthen that? Yeah, because I think you're right. There are people that won't be able to, maybe take a substance and go through that experiential part, but could also just be really great space holders, right? And maybe they don't understand the terrain, but why exclude them if they could be really great space holders? And I don't know, on the other side, I've definitely argued, like, I think it's important to know the terrain if you're going to be kind of doing this full time and, you want to make a career out of it, like really understand the nuances of transpersonal domains and, some of the stuff that could potentially come up there. And knowing that you feel confident enough to maybe help somebody while they're experiencing something like that.
right. Yeah. So absolutely. And then like contrasting that with something like American Disabilities Act, where a lot of groups had to modify the structure of their, spaces and like provide different types of materials like, braille and, audio when they're blind, that kind of stuff. So like, or like text, like we're trying our best to offer as much text as we can, because we can't necessarily afford to transcribe everything. And, that excludes deaf people. So
Yeah.
like, what do we do? How do we try to be as inclusive as possible? And, if a therapist might be an amazing therapist, but they've got a strong disability, should we on purpose exclude them?
Right.
Or should we figure out how to include them? I think being inclusive has an advantage, but how do we balance that? That all I'm saying is there's an open question here.
Yeah, definitely. And that's something I wasn't really thinking of. So I'm glad that you brought that up here.
Yeah, that's what I mean. Like the safety, like that when it's not safe for them because their blood pressure is all screwy or whatever, I'm sure there's plenty of indications, like you're on bipolar meds,
Right.
but you're a great therapist, like what do you do?
Right.
So, yeah, inclusivity.
It's important. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Because it's not just about race and gender. There's a lot of other things. There's a lot, super autistic people, like, perhaps it's probably not a fair way to say it, but people that are,
On the spectrum.
quite disabled and on the spectrum, like where do they fit in?
Yeah.
Do they? And this idea of neurotypical is like become really embedded in me because I'm like, who the fuck is neurotypical?
Mm.
Like it's kind of like a myth almost. Like I get the point and we should use it, but it's like, there's something going on there because psyches are quite diverse.
Mm-hmm.
Neurologies are quite diverse. But yeah, like just, food for thought.
Yeah.
So yeah, just really great. And what's going to be cool about this TheraPsil thing is that we're going to have now a whole bunch of therapists with this experience, and we can maybe like compare their results to American results or like European results, English results. So like, I think that's going to be really cool. And maybe the data is that these therapists are better, like better performance than elsewhere. It's not always about the drug. Like the drug is a big part of it. The plant is a big part of it, but the skills required and how good you are in the room definitely plays a part.
Yeah. I agree. think that's a huge part of it.
Yeah, totally. Man, I recorded with Dina Justice again last night about her own, like, we finally got into her personal healing story. It's going to be a blockbuster episode, by the way. Like, she talks about her underground, like, her sitter that's worked with her and all sorts of interesting stuff. And like, just hearing it from like that kind of transformation level is going to be really interesting, especially because she's kind of like an insider.
Mm-hmm. Cool.
Yeah. So probably not going to see that till February, but it's in the books. We've recorded it.
We do have a nice, healthy backlog, which is nice.
Oh my goodness. I need to stop recording. So next up is this article about going off the rails. This is a pretty interesting article. Was it Roland Griffiths, Kyle, and a few others kind of co-wrote this paper?
Yep.
Yeah. So the concern is there's so much happening and so little like centralized control and people doing their own thing. Like, you and I have heard about some really kooky shit that I don't know how to feel about it.
Right.
And, it's like kind of troubling. And I'm sure these guys do too. These people over at, Hopkins and wherever else are like, I don't know. So I only really read the conclusion there, and I was a little, their bias because of who they are is quite medical. And I get it.
I think that's what they're trying to really argue here is that, could psychedelics, the way that it's being, promoted, flaunted at times, about, being advertised sometimes as a panacea or like a cure, they have curative properties, and kind of getting ahead of the science could, potentially have an impact on the science and kind of come to a halt again. And interesting, this new period of psychedelic research, ongoing since at least 2006, has lasted for about the same length of time as psychedelic research in the 50s and 60s before it ground to a halt. I thought that was a really interesting sentence. I didn't even really think about that. But so I think it's really cautioning like how people are moving forward and maybe not getting ahead of the science at times, and just it could maybe, I think it is kind of at this fork in the road where science is going one way, and now we're having like decriminalization initiatives and the spiritual and religious use cases, or just, the whole microdosing, or maybe we want to use the word recreational. And how could that start raising more awareness in the political arena that could be like, hey, we need to stop this all over again. Or, what type of dangers does it possibly raise when people are reading it from this clinical perspective and really trying to find a clinical use out of it and taking it into their own hands, and also maybe not getting that, right? Actually having some harmful effect there, harmful outcome, which, talking to a lot of people I've heard at times saying, hey, I read Pollan's book and I decided to do this on my own, or I went to an underground person and, either this abuse happened or I had a really horrible experience and I don't really know how to make sense of it now. And I thought it was going to be this really healing thing because that's what I keep reading about. So, yeah, I mean, it is something to consider, right? I'll read a little bit.
Right. Because
here.
really, what was it? Art. I forget the guy's name exactly. Linkletter, Art Letletter or something. Like, his daughter, he was a big TV personality. His daughter allegedly fell out of a window or jumped out of a window on LSD. I think that's kind of debated if she was or was not on LSD. And that was the main story that got a ton of publicity against psychedelics. And, thankfully now we've got well over, 70 something years of experience with LSD as a species. And I think we've gotten a lot better at it overall. Like, people still make mistakes for sure, but I think it's a lot less than it was in the 60s and 50s.
Yeah.
We've got movies, we've got books, we've got podcasts. And I think all of that together helps reduce the harm and the scary profile of these things. I don't know if I've ever told you this, Kyle, but I've been at 2 parties, no LSD as far as I know, where people fell off a roof and died.
Alcohol related or?
Totally.
Yeah. It happens, right? A lot of people do a lot of dumb stuff on alcohol.
Right. And how, it's not politicized because it's just, alcohol has been with us for so long.
Mm-hmm.
Hard alcohol, distilled alcohol, kind of a lot more recent. What I think that was like 1400s, roughly, maybe even a little slightly earlier that kind of came to Europe. But yeah, and that really changed the game with alcohol. Before it was like maximum 14%.
Mm.
And this stuff was, kind of expensive still, probably. It's not cheap. Whereas, you can just put a bunch of shit in a pot and like distill it and you've got hardcore alcohol.
Yeah.
So yeah, like harms and risks and all this stuff, like, the longer we can go without having like really nasty stories pop up, the better, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And, if we can help somebody, we probably should for the movement.
Yeah.
Like in terms of harm reduction and, consulting therapy, whatnot, like the better outcomes there are, those can hopefully offset negative outcomes that are going to show up.
Yeah.
Like this is a really, really hard talk track because there is going to be psychedelic fallout. There has been psychedelic fallout. People have been hurt more than they have been helped.
Yeah.
As individuals.
Yeah.
Like how bad is HPPD? Like one go at LSD and you've got, your HPPD is going nuts. And that's a pretty rare thing, but it's still out there.
Yeah. I mean, I think this is the reason why I got interested in this project to begin with. And my interest in psychedelics was my early fallout that really caused, I think, sometimes a lot of psychological harm to some degree and a lot of confusion. And I think we need to be having some of these honest conversations, even if it goes against, like, say, our mission here at times of wanting to help get these substances legalized, decriminalized, whatever that track is, and to really kind of talk about the promise of it. And, sometimes maybe we do get idealistic and say, this is going to revolutionize and change the world. But I also have to think back to some of my past experiences and be like, do I want to go through that again? I don't think so. I mean, it pushed me out on the other side and I think made me a stronger person to some degree. But kind of going through what I went through for like in those early years, I mean, that was
right. It
pretty
makes you a lot more
terrifying.
cautious.
Yeah.
Yeah. So like the caution is there. The caution's real and the harm is real. And we can pretend it doesn't exist, but that doesn't help, right?
Yeah.
Like we can pretend climate change doesn't exist, but it's still a pretty big thing that we should be considering.
Yeah.
So, I'm not trying to scare anybody off. It's just like, let's understand that there are risks. Like the same thing, like you're doing a saline drip on somebody to help them hydrate. There is a risk from the needle.
Mm-hmm.
It's not zero. And, it's pretty low. It's a really small risk, but it's not zero. And like Christina Groff, I think she died from like a really minor surgery.
Oh, really? I did not know that.
Yeah, I think it was like a blood clot or something and a really minor surgery. Yeah, it's really unfortunate, right? Because huge influence for us.
Yeah.
Apparently, she does not have a wiki page, which is super weird.
Guess somebody has to draft one up.
Yeah, someone do that. Link us. We'll start linking it to it. Like her books are great. Like she was the reason I believe that music was brought in to the degree it was to holotropic breathwork, and she had a really strong musical background, and thus holotropic breathwork today. Like Stan brought in a lot of the other stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. So, just kind of coming back to this article, it's just really
it was pneumonia. Sorry.
Pneumonia. Okay.
Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
But yeah, just really kind of taking into consideration a lot of the risks where we're at. And I think this article is really just like cautioning a fast forward movement, which, we've been seeing definitely in the past years, right? This is something that you and I and Lenny have been getting into to some degree. Like, why does psychiatry and the medical model have to have so much say over it? And can we say that, religious and spiritual use is important and just as valid? So I don't know, ethical things to consider too, right?
Yeah. Like, is Burning Man valid? Is Spongel valid? Like, are raves okay? Is it okay for a couple to choose when to do MDMA together at home? What is okay? What is not okay? And, should people be going to prison? Should we work to release everybody from prison who's, as political prisoners? Like, probably. It's my take. But, we're not there yet as a culture. Yeah. Like, is it okay that a lot of these companies are valued at, not a lot of them. I think there's one that's over $1 billion and one that's not close behind $1 billion. Is there like market cap? And like, it's pretty crazy. And there's still people in jail for selling, a couple hits of LSD.
Yeah.
And there's people that are like, I think have near life sentences in some states for cannabis. Like there's this case right now in Wyoming. Riley Capps just commented on this, and like the degree to which you can get beat up for having like a pound of cannabis in Wyoming is insane relative to like it barely being a situation here in Colorado.
Right.
That's terrifying. Really terrifying. But Colorado, I believe, still has prisoners
for cannabis
convictions.
And they haven't released them at all. Wow.
I think they released some, but it's like, it's not full on. Like I think even if somebody was selling 20 pounds a month, they need to be let go, assuming they didn't do anything violent. Yeah. Like yes, they broke the law, but look at all these people making a killing and all the jobs that are in this space. And like those people could probably be great contributors to the cannabis world if they were released from prison and given some sort of, I don't know what the move is. Like I remember like someone told me about California and certain counties in Los Angeles. Like there was a number of folks that got released from prison who had, simple drug possession charges, and some of them were given cannabis dispensary licenses as like, part of their reparations for that. I think that's a big deal. I think it's really helpful.
It's huge.
And the argument becomes like, why should a huge corporation get them, but all these other people who are paying to incarcerate and like doing harm to their families through multiple generations, like, shouldn't they get something?
Yeah, that's the weird thing about the whole legalization and business aspect of when plants are criminalized or drugs are criminalized, and it's okay for, certain entities to sell it versus like, and why haven't, we released some of those, past offenders as, cannabis is becoming legalized in a lot of different states.
Yeah.
Doesn't seem fair. It's like,
no, not at all. Yeah. And I think like if this is all the stuff. So disclosure, Kyle and I are working on a project around ethics right now with Lenny, and it's a really interesting one. And we've had a lot of education on what are ethics. And it's going to be an interesting project. You'll hear more about it later. But yeah, this is a lot of the stuff we've been chatting about.
Yeah, this paper, I think, like touches on some of the stuff that we have been exploring, right? Like the medicalization, and like here they're talking more kind of around like rule-based ethics versus like virtue-based ethics, and really trying to put some rules around this within psychiatry and medicine versus say, do these have spiritual and religious use? And does that lead to the good of the community or society? And is it good for the individual as well? Mm-hmm. And why are these things illegal to begin with, right? And should they even be considered drugs? And the only, and I think one of Lenny's arguments, the only reason why they're kind of going through this whole process is because they became drugs in the first place, right? So you need to kind of go through this whole process to legalize them. But like if the plant just stayed the plant, was never legalized or made illegal, then, would you have to kind of argue its point and go through this whole process? Maybe, these new entities pop up like the FDA, and when people are using stuff, maybe they catch wind and want some, science behind it. But
yeah. And how about that argument? Like, what even are drugs?
Right.
Like, when did that concept become a thing? Like, I love that book, Drugged by Richard Miller. I think I've gone through it 3 times now, because he like talks about the origins of it, and it comes out like people were making industrial products and they were like, oh, these chemicals are pretty weird. I wonder if there's other applications, like paints and dyes and I think like lubricants and all sorts of stuff like around industrial culture. And then all this other stuff came out as a result. Like the Germans had tons of these companies, and they were kind of leading it for a while. And yeah, that's how we got a ton of these drugs. It's like the history of drugs is super interesting. Yeah. So I recommend that book to folks. Definitely check that one out. Yeah. What else do we want to chat about, Kyle?
There was another interesting article here about datura at the Pinwheel Cave in California.
Yeah, the California article is pretty interesting. What was your read on that?
Just that they, found evidence that datura was being used. So kind of goes back on rock art. So just, again, kind of like pointing towards, maybe some sort of historical use of datura within, kind of these maybe indigenous or native folks that were in that area. Trying to find the date that they said it goes back to.
It was pretty old, but it wasn't like that old. I think it was 2,000 years old, maybe. And, it's interesting, right? Like we know that people have relationships to plants and you're going to find plants in your area and you're going to, useful or not useful. And like over time, we're going to get that. And I think it's pretty natural to assume that people are going to modify their consciousness with plants and other things too. Like some of the rituals out there are mind-bogglingly brutal.
Yeah, and datura is a pretty intense plant medicine too.
Have you done anything with it?
No, not at all.
I've talked to some people that have, and they seem to like it. It seems like you got to commit a few days, which, it's kind of tough to say like, oh, try this thing. It only takes 3 days, where it's like DMT. It's like, you got 15 minutes. And it's like, what? How do you, like, the cell is harder on these other kind of less popular drugs and plants.
Right. I had somebody I knew that I went to school with. They mentioned that they ate a bunch of seeds when they were younger, and they ended up in the hospital. I think thinking like insects were crawling all over them, and they said it was just super, super intense.
Yeah, I bet. It sounds rough. Yeah. And I think I just read too that Brian Murarescu's book that kind of argues for this ancient drugs theory. It just got awarded like audiobook of the year.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So really excited about that. Like he is an attorney. I think he did really well in the legal world and finance world. And what I'm noticing, I've been talking to a number of attorneys, like they're really interested in this drug policy game now. Like, because, regular folks have been able to do stuff like Denver, like Portland, like Seattle, Oregon, like relatively little money spent on these things, and they were able to make it work. What happens when attorneys get together and like work on the project together? Because there are attorneys out there that want this stuff to be more available, less criminalized.
Right.
Interesting to note is that they're still battling with the same thing that kind of we do, which is like, how do we phase this thing? What do we do first? What do we save for last? It's like, I think a lot of our project is like really long game.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's so many different angles to take with this. And I think that's what makes this whole field kind of really interesting and exciting, and also really confusing at times, right? It's like, do we take this kind of like slower route through medicalization and, get strong evidence that, these are, safe and effective medicines for certain disorders. On the flip side, we get into the cognitive liberty where, that could potentially have a little bit more fallout for people, getting themselves in a little bit more harm, or maybe not thinking about set and setting and thinking about like, drug testing, this and that. And that's where you start to, experience some of those harms and what type of impact does that have on, community and society at large.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, these are really big questions, and as things develop, I think we're all trying to figure it out. I mean, I'm just even surprised with some of the decriminalization, how quick that moved. And again, decriminalization doesn't mean legalization, but I think it also gives a little bit of like okayness to maybe feel a little bit protected, in your choices, being like, okay, I know I'm not going to get a felony possession if it's the lowest priority. And, what type of things come out of that? What type of community support comes out of that? What type of systems start to be developed? Like, I'm sure there's really interesting things going on in like Oakland, right? Like I remember seeing stuff about like, how do we create these like little co-ops, or how do we, provide medicine to the community? What type of like services can they offer? I don't know.
Yeah, exactly. It's like rewind the tape 4.5 years, right? When we started this thing, like none of this was really on our map, on our radar. I think like largely we wanted an easier drug policy, but we never really expected what played out.
Mm-hmm.
Like, Kevin Matthews with Denver, like that's an unbelievable project, like really amazing, really exciting to know that he did it and did it with not much money, largely grassroots support. And,
it's a huge
really
win.
changed the game. Like that was the thing that opened the floodgates, in my opinion, for what happened in Oakland, Santa Cruz, et cetera. It's not really a big deal to say that. It's like, an obvious statement, but like how could we have ever predicted that?
I mean, New Jersey here, they tried to sneak in dropping a felony charge of psilocybin down to a misdemeanor charge. They have a decriminalization bill that was going for cannabis. I forget what it was, up to like 16 ounces or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And last minute, they snuck in this statement about dropping the possession of an ounce of psilocybin mushrooms down to a misdemeanor. And it kind of had all this stalling at the House and whatnot. And I think right now they're looking at maybe breaking the two bills up, because they're like, where the hell did that come from? Was it a strategic move to stall the decriminalization bill, or is there hope? Somebody in there was like, hey, look at what's happening across the country. Here's some of these other cities or towns passing these initiatives. Maybe we can just throw it in there. Maybe they won't notice and we'll sign off on this. And it did. I think it passed the House, but then I think they caught on what they were voting on. They're like, wait a minute. This might not pass.
Right. Yeah. So it's really, I'm just happy it's playing out this way. I agree with the people who wrote that paper that we do need to be cautious. Like, let's not be too reckless. Like I think, how many times have we as individuals been told, don't screw this up? And then as a movement, we've been told it, like at conferences and whatnot, pretty regularly, don't screw this up. This is a really amazing opportunity. Let's not lose.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think there's just, a lot of education too, right? So they point towards, they make a statement here in the article. Despite this promise, cultural forces such as those that occurred in the 1960s may threaten the contemporary research progress and clinical application of psychedelics. For example, numerous recent popular press books, websites, podcasts, and media reports have uncritically promoted presumed benefits of psychedelics. And, I think we do have to be careful about that, right? Like how can we talk about some of this stuff with a critical lens and also be honest, right? They went on to say psychedelics are neither a cure for mental disorders nor a quick fix for an unfulfilled life, and should not be portrayed as a panacea, right? Because how many people are at like a desperate place in their life, and the way that it is being portrayed, they maybe drain their bank account and go to Jamaica, go to the Netherlands, go to Peru, thinking that like this will change their life. And, they come back and they realize they had a really profound experience, but wow, now we have to actually start doing some work that is maybe a little bit more challenging, or it's really disrupted a lot of things in our lives and could make things feel a little bit worse at times too.
Or a lot worse.
Yeah.
Or a lot worse.
Yeah.
Like people have killed themselves.
Yeah.
We've heard stories of suicides post-session.
Yeah.
It's no joke.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like I got a message yesterday from somebody like asking for some help, and essentially this person consumed mushrooms and like took off and ended up in a hotel in Brazil somewhere. Jeez. And they're like ranting like a maniac on Facebook.
Mm.
And like, is that mania? Is that something else that's going on. Like it's a really creepy thing, and we don't have yet the infrastructure required, to say like, all right, fucking absolutely game on for psychiatric use. Can we say the same thing about Burning Man? Maybe, maybe not. Like, I don't know. At Fish shows, I see very little fallout. There's a lot of LSD going down, and there's very little fallout.
Yeah, why do you think that is? Like,
it's such an beautiful thing. It's like amplifier mental process, right? Or psychic process. Like, you're so up already that you're going to be up even more.
Mm-hmm.
And you've got this amazing cultural container that accepts it. Like, if you're totally lost and like pretty much naked, someone's probably going to help you out, and you probably don't have to go to prison. And you're at a Justin Timberlake concert and you do the same thing, you're probably going to jail.
Right.
Right. Like, what is that? Like, it's just a different culture that's been doing this since the 90s, early 90s. And, that's kind of a big deal. Same thing with the dead world. Like,
I'm sure there is fallout, right? I mean, I've heard people.
But there absolutely is fallout from drug use. Yeah. Absolutely. If we want to generalize it to drug use in general, totally. Like, I'm sure there's fallout from LSD use. There's like bad relationship juju going on sometimes. Like, like I've seen some things that weren't great, but it's like usually they worked out. And in my opinion, usually it was in the right direction for them.
Right.
Usually. But, there's some people that's like, this is the best thing in the world. Like, I don't want to do anything else. So like ambition goes out the window, and like, relationships kind of fall apart, and gets a little strange.
Yeah. So I just, education and caution, I think, is the point here moving forward, and to be really honest with yourself too, especially if you're in a place that are educating folks about psychedelics. How can you listen to other people's stories and, maybe hear that maybe they're not always, light and magic, that people do experience a lot of, fallout from it at times, and things can get worse. I mean, I've definitely chatted with a lot of people, seeking help in that. And is that fallout going to increase with, bigger people coming in, maybe promoting different products? And if that market does start to come to fruition, will there be more fallout in the general public without like parameters set in place? So
like, I'd love to see doctors that you can consult before going to a festival or before going to the Amazon. That would be amazing. And like places that you can go to when you're done. Like, we have psychedelic.support. We've got the MAPS integration list. Like, we've got some services, but it's not at scale enough yet to accommodate the demand. But people love getting high. People have always loved getting high, and we need to get ready for that, because we can't keep lying to ourselves. People don't like getting high, and we shouldn't prep for it. No, we should prep for it. Like, people should keep getting educated and keep moving forward. Yeah. Cool. So I think that's about it, everybody. Again, check out psychedelicEducationCenter.com for our upcoming 8-week training, navigating psychedelics for clinicians and therapists. I promise you'll love it. 45-day money back guarantee if you don't like it. Yeah. So, check it out. Like, you get if you sign up soon, you get access to all of our material before we even kick off in January. So you can get really ahead of everybody and even have a more educational time. The more you put in, the more you get out. And, you can read all the testimonials up there. Check it out, psychedelicEducationCenter.com. And, I think we're good.
All right. Signing off. Thanks everybody. Thanks, Joe.
Take care, everybody. See you next time.
Until next time.